That's bogus, Manu.
All right,
You're a
I'm
lucky
recording.
producer, Ben.
Sorry, my bad. My bad.
Okay.
Repeat everything you just said. All right.
Get a little acting training. But yeah, so my name is Caesar. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And I'm a musician and community organizer, born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And how I got introduced to Vinny actually was through my acting journey approximately 2 or 3 years ago, where I was just seeing different opportunities throughout the Midwest for media. And I actually was able to be a part of a docu-series called Divided We Fall, which is narrated by Dan Rather and is basically a project getting 12 people from different political backgrounds to sit down and have a conversation in the weekend, to have that conversation, not conflict, during this time, especially with the political tension and just the things that are going on in this nation. I think that we're extremely polarized, whether it be the left and the right. And I think that we often have a stance of being argumentative instead of just being more open to listening. I could be the first to admit that that was my problem myself. I went there with a book of reasons why my stats are right and why I'm progressive, and they really humanize the experience and let us take a step back and learn more about our backgrounds, our traditions, why we may think the way we do. And when we were reading over the Constitution and different things like that, it was interesting that we were all picking out the same things that we agreed on. And it was really just that pursuit, right, of just being able to live, like really live with your family and being able to succeed, and seeing how that is different depending on the community that you're from. So from there, I came back to Milwaukee, and I've been working with an organization called Public Allies through AmeriCorps. And their motto is everyone leads. And basically they're an organization that's focused on getting diverse leaders in different positions of change in nonprofit spaces, as well as just different community organizations. Through them, I was placed at the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee as their social justice coordinator. Prior to getting this position, I didn't know what Unitarians were, didn't even know that was a thing. I just know that during the introduction, when I drove past their church, they had a huge Black Lives Matter flag and a huge like LGBTQ like flag and just empowerment, things like that. And a lot of, I don't know if you all know, but Milwaukee is traditionally the most segregated city in the country. We actually have the highest, we're second now behind New Jersey this year, but prior to this year, we've been the the highest rate of incarceration for Black males in the country. So it was really interesting being in this space, because being a social justice coordinator at a congregation with primarily, it was about 750 older white people, like, you know, it really was different from me coming from that other side of the tracks. Like I said, Milwaukee being segregated, I'm from the Latino community, born and raised on the south side of Milwaukee, where we see a lot of the disparities that people talk about when we're discussing social justice. So the past year has been really interesting for me, trying to like intertwine intergenerational work, interracial work, and just seeing that with Milwaukee being so segregated, it has directly affected our community, our relationships, and seeing that there are resources for Black and brown empowerment for youth is just being able to connect, because I see so much silos. And I think that in community and nonprofit work, I see that a lot. People are kind of in their own thing when we literally have all the resources to help sustain and provide for each other. So that's a little bit of what I've been working on.
Fantastic. Fantastic work. Yeah, I was, it's not much different. I live right next to Cedar Rapids, and we've got a pretty high rate of Black incarceration, if you want to call it that, because they are a clear minority in this state. It is not, it is not a highly diverse state at all. Unitarians are really interesting people. You know, they evolved from the philosophies of Ralph Waldo Emerson. And so they have a lot of very open views about just nature, the oversoul, all these things. And a lot of my friends who were Jewish, who were Christians, they kind of glommed onto that because it's a very welcoming place for a lot of different perspectives.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting with the Unitarians, because as I mentioned, I didn't even know that was a thing, right? So it just goes to show And the church that I serve at now, that I'm placed at, it's actually the fourth oldest church, if not Wisconsin, in Milwaukee. So I believe it was before 1848, which is before we actually became a
Wow.
state. Yeah, so it's like I have this huge piece of history learning about James Reeb and like the civil rights
Yeah,
activists
yeah,
that were Unitarians, right? And like seeing their groundwork, frontline social justice work. Me being a brown person from a Black and brown community, I'm like, where was I, right? I've been born and raised in a
All right.
city. I'm a few miles old. That goes back to segregation itself. Like it's mind blowing to me to this day to know that I have a congregation now and I have a network of all these primarily older white people that are extremely down for the cause, for social justice activities, demonstrations, and just as you mentioned, just different type of enlightenment and just sharing information through different cultures and backgrounds, which I appreciate from them. And if I didn't have this position, right, randomly working through social justice circles, I would have no idea that there is a community space that is really trying to put their foot forward and focus on Black and brown empowerment and just overall social justice. So I think it's a really interesting dynamic how, as I mentioned, there's resources, right? But just the way that society has kind of structured itself, we are not all feel as accessible to those resources often.
Right. That's
yeah,
right.
yeah, definitely.
Like, so
Just
Caesar, what would you suggest to people if they want to get involved, like in general, like, do you have any suggestions?
Yeah. For me, because I've been trying to fight for advocacy my whole life. Like ever
Right,
since
right,
I was maybe 7, my mom has actually been really big on social justice and advocacy. So since I was really young and just being from that community, I've
right,
always seen like, okay, there's disparity. Some people really are struggling just to live, right? While other people
Yeah.
don't see that and they don't even see the inconvenience that, that we
right.
often have to face. So I've always been fighting it. I talk about it in my music. I'm sure when we're on set, I've mentioned things about power to the people and my like progressive
Yeah,
values, right? But
right,
as far as having an actual structure, a system, a way that I can enact change, I didn't have any of that. I was just a brown kid that was just speaking on life experiences and knowing that shit wasn't right because I was a product of that.
yeah,
But recently, like I said, being with AmeriCorps and joining those other folks at the docu-series, and more importantly, doing the work that I do at the First Unitarian Society, where I'm building relationships, not just with them, but with so many different community organizations throughout the city. Like I'm working with immigration rights groups, Black Lives Matter group, MICA, different interfaith organizations. And to me, that has been like the most refreshing thing. I think if somebody wants to get proactive, there's a lot of different organizations. I know, at least in my city, and I'm sure there's so many different things coming up for where people can just be more of a collective because from my experience, I'm 28 and I've been fighting this for my whole 20 years just about how things aren't right. And I just got, I talk about it in my music, but that's about it, right? I just get frustrated and you see the
mhm,
angry Facebook posts about how things aren't right, but that
right,
can
right,
often cause a burnout within myself. And it's like, what
Yeah.
am I actually doing? So when I was able to navigate the system better, right? Like working at the First Unitarian Society and meeting, to be frank, these older white people that really cared and have that are civil rights lawyers and have past experience of marching in the 60s and introducing me to other groups with resources that I can directly give back to my community, right? So I think that was like the empowering part about it, knowing that like there are systems in place and good or bad, like we have to navigate through those systems, right?
Yeah.
Because everything
mhm,
is still structured through white
yeah,
supremacy. As much as I love the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee and the things that I've learned, they'll be the
Right.
first to admit that it's based on a hierarchy of white supremacy as
Right.
so many other structures are in this country, right? So it's just
yeah,
finding inclusivity as a whole. And like I said, to me personally, I would just have people just to try to get involved. Whether that's join a group, join a collective, because like I said, that's empowered me. And then just be uncomfortable a little bit. Like I said, I have a
Yeah.
congregation of 700, people that are from different backgrounds as myself. So before this pandemic, when we did have our in-person Sundays, it was interesting, right? Because there were some
Right.
questions and different backgrounds and there was microaggressions, I'll be quite frank, and people don't
Right.
know where they're coming from, right? So I think that me kind of realizing that and be like, okay, I can just be pissed off because they don't understand, because they frankly
right,
don't understand, or I can be patient. We can talk about the things that we know in background. And then from there, that's how I've been able to navigate and have those different community organizations and partners and people that are on the same board as me and helping move forward.
yeah.
what is the diverse makeup of the congregation you work with?
with 750 members, to be honest, I'd say at least 700 of them are white. As far as intergenerational, I'd say maybe over 60 to 70% are over the age of maybe like 60. So it's primarily, I would say, older, but we have, then there's some like 30s, 40s, but it's primarily Caucasian people. Yep. I was the only person of color on staff. I was definitely the only Puerto Rican, I'm sure, in the building
wow.
quite a few times.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting how but you know, a lot of those people probably did live through the civil rights movement, and so they took that to heart, and that's been a part of their whole life, you know.
Yeah, exactly. I've learned, and that's the thing is for me, is all the learning experience, right? There's so many things that prior to having this position, I'm sure I had imposter syndrome when I think about the 30 and 40 years that people have had under their belts and the diplomas and their doctorates, and I'll be the first to tell people, like, I barely made it from high school. I'm just a brown kid. I'm just a rapper from the south side of Milwaukee that has just been able to utilize my voice and has always had an extreme interest in political science, right, and how things work and how my people aren't living the way that other people are living. So that's been my gift, I guess, in educating them. And as you mentioned, like, it's a blessing for me to talk to people that literally marched with MLK and telling me about the segregation in Chicago and how, like, it was really interesting to me because I didn't realize, I guess, how much faith institutions and like faith communities, right, during the civil rights movement were just like really leading everything and really just on board, not just with the resources as they often did and with their own physical bodies, but just having that foundation of like faith and how important it is to have like a spiritual grounding, whatever that may be, when we're doing this type of work. So
what a lot of people don't understand is that the Jewish community really served an important part in the civil rights movement. They were the ones that formed the ACLU. They were the Jewish lawyers that came out of New York and went south and said, we're going to go and help these people. Wow. And people are like, wow, I wouldn't think that would come out of the Jewish community. And I'm like, why not? You know, they have a conscience.
I mean, Jewish people went through a lot as well. I mean, if you look throughout history, you know, they suffered a lot as well. So that's
it. So many years they had such a bad reputation that was unfounded, you know.
Yeah.
All the way back in history, all the way back to Shakespeare, you know.
Right.
But they did a lot in the civil rights movement. They defended the Black people. They gave, you know, they created the ACLU. They helped fund the NCAAP, you know.
Right.
Those were very valuable people. So, you know, you think about the different cultures that really all played a role in that. And it wasn't just Black civil rights either. I mean, the Asian community was highly scorned for many years post-World War. Right. And it took them a long time to become, you know, accepted and valuable members of the community. People just shunned them, you know.
Right, especially.
That's why we have Chinatowns.
Right. I mean, look at the Chinese people. They built the railroads, you know, and then during the Korean War, a lot of Koreans were persecuted. That was the Koreans that were living in the U.S. They were also persecuted. Yeah.
People have discriminated against nationalities for years and years throughout our history. I mean, personally, from my history of family, there was always signs in the windows that said Irish need not apply.
Right.
Because we had a reputation of being a drunken group.
Right.
Which may not be incorrect completely, but stereotypes come from somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, it takes time. Unfortunately, it takes time to change for things to change, you know. And then the hard part, really, like Caesar was saying, like try to being able to have a conversation with people sometimes can be hard. Some people just don't want to listen, unfortunately.
Right.
No,
that's
exactly
true.
right.
Yeah. So,
you know, some people will hold on to their prejudice and their hate for as long as they live.
Right.
because it's been passed down from generation to generation, you know.
Right. Like they won't even listen. They won't even listen if you try to talk to them.
No,
You know?
they're so close-minded they won't even listen.
Right.
You know, and the rise in hate groups is very, very disturbing to me, because I
Right.
really thought we had gotten to a point where we had kind of wiped out that mentality back in, you know, the 80s or something like that. And now they're just growing like crazy.
Yeah.
I think I feel like that it's always been there. It's just now kind of coming into the public eye. I mean, it's always been there.
Yeah, no, you're right.
I think
Yeah.
social media has helped to kind of unveil like what's happening.
Right.
But I feel like, I mean, it's
giving them
always
an
been
outlet.
there. Yeah.
It's always
Yeah.
been there, but
Yeah.
now they have a platform they can work on.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, I think they have, in the current political environment, they have a sense of empowerment, that it's okay,
Mm-hmm.
All right.
which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
See,
Not
with
okay.
Yeah.
like with you got people on both sides who have social media now. You know.
Yeah.
Right.
So everyone has like an equal platform of how they feel, you know, good and bad. So,
Well, and I go back to the same thing as, if you're offended by something you see on TV, you change the channel.
right.
If you're offended by something you see on Facebook, unless you're just curious or something, if it offends you, walk away from it.
Yeah.
Right.
Focus on the positive, not
Right.
the things that bother you.
Right.
But too many people then get into debates, and Facebook debates to me are just,
Right.
it's not all that terribly meaningful.
Right.
No.
I think it depends on how you articulate yourself. Me being only 28, I've seen like social media is extremely important when we talk about community. Right now, this is our community, right? Me talking to you three through the screen because we're currently in a pandemic. So, you know, when we look at social media, a lot of people can be dismissive on it. And I've had my moments, like as you all were alluding to, I can gauge somebody when I'm having a conversation, right? I can talk to somebody and I can know just off of your response if you're actually have an intent to listen. And even though you may differ in your perspectives, are you still listening with that intent? Or, as I mentioned, how I was ready to go on Divide and We Fall. Are you ready? Are you already loaded with your counterpoints and your data and
Right.
why you're right? And I think that's kind of the same with social media. It's, you know, this is social media is media. You know, I think we often
Yes.
got excluded from life. Like this is the only way I'm living right now, though. Is I'm talking to y'all through this screen. So I think that is extremely important. As far as I'm not going to argue with every right-wing person or someone that may differ with myself, but am I going to have conversations with my Black and brown folks that may have a little bit of self-hatred in their posts, that might not understand the gravitas of Black Lives Matter? Yes. Am I going to have those conversations about how colonialism, colorism, you know, how we have a huge problem with machismo in the Latino community and like patriarchy and all that? Like, yeah, and I talk about it. And a big part of that, why I'm so adamant in thinking that social media is a good tool is because my job, right? I'm a rapper, producer, musician, actor. I'm on the screen, so people appreciate that, and I've been able to have somewhat of a following and a fan base to where when I'm talking, as I'm talking now, eloquently about my points and how I think that things need to be changed when we talk about systemic structures, people often listen. And I have been able to change people's opinions, or we have had conversations on social media to where people have been like, now I get it. Thank you. So I think it's often about how we go on there. Now, if I go on their post and say, F you don't care about Black people, then we're probably not going to be as receptive with each other, right? So I think it's all about how we form the conversation, because I think these conversations need to be had.
Yeah,
You know,
definitely.
and too often, oh, go ahead, Kavita, I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. No, I was going to say that absolutely. I think approach is so important. And I was going to ask about how you were saying in the congregation that you're with, that there are group members who are much older and who've had a lot more experience. Do you find that their approach is very different from the youth Or are there things that are very similar? Like does the older population approach the activism versus the youth?
Yeah. I think
That's a very good question.
that's a really good question. Yeah,
Yeah.
I said it earlier. I think
Yeah.
it's hard to, I don't want to like throw all of my congregation as far as like their
Absolutely not. Yeah.
opinions,
Right,
but like
right.
from what I can, I I think that when we look at the original civil rights era, I think it was black and brown, but it was really like it was seeing like black people getting as was going on now, continuously being brutalized. And I think the
Right.
civil rights was a really good opportunity for white people to step up and be like, how can I help as being a white person? I'm thinking about someone from my congregation who she's like the most sweetest lady, and she told me she would march in Chicago in like the 60s, MLK, and she told me that their jobs actually going up there were to be to hold hands with like the two African Americans that were next to them in case breaking chains like that, right?
Yes.
And then when I was actually in Minnesota on day 3 of the George Floyd protests, and I wanted to see what was going on front lines, I went and we actually brought a whole bunch of supplies for the community in that area because food banks and things have been affected. So we just brought a whole bunch of food and medical supplies. And we're going to frontline as we're protesting. I'm hearing white people tell the other white people and black people tell the white people like, hey, go to the front when this happens. And it kind of reminded
the
me
white
of
shield.
like, they're there for that reason.
Yes.
Yeah, it was nice knowing that, like, because with activism, I think oftentimes when we talk about social justice, because there are so many different complexities to it, the white saviorism, like that's a thing, and I think that
Yes.
that definitely happens in social justice circles, right? And and I've like I said, we see it in different microaggressions and different things. Like Milwaukee, we're actually on day 17 of having nonstop protests, and some of them have been great, and some of them have been white-led and there's different things with that. So I think what might be different this time is the understanding of intersectionality as a whole. You know, that's just been coined, I believe, since what, the 70s or the 80s. And I think that like my generation is really starting to get a grasp on that. Like it doesn't matter what it's gonna affect you, right? Like it doesn't matter if black, white, LGBT, like they're coming. Like white supremacy is coming for you. It is a structure that is going to destroy every marginalized community, everybody that has already been left out. And I think that my people just we kind of know that moving forward. And I think that that's a big part. I know that us being able to use the media again, right, is as divisive it can be. The media has been helpful. Us having these everywhere we go has been extremely helpful for the social justice fight. So
to some degree.
Yeah.
Sometimes they inflame it because they're looking for sensationalism.
Sure.
Yeah, but if this didn't exist, we probably wouldn't know how bad it looked having someone's knee on somebody's neck.
Yeah, that's the important. When it's real journalism, then it's good.
Yeah.
But people just really want to inflame because it makes for good drama, good entertainment.
That's the thing is for somebody like myself, I'm Afro-Latino, black and brown bodies every day. Like that's every day. Like that's what I'm saying. Like to people that are unfamiliar with that, it might be this and that. But right now, like if I walk outside my door, regardless of all of my awards and all of the things that I've done in my community, right? If I walk out the door now and I see a squad car, I automatically get nauseous, want to throw up, have to use the bathroom. Immediately, that anxiety kicks in. Why? Maybe it's because of the past stress. Maybe because I had to file a complaint with the Milwaukee Police Department for hitting me with a billy club when I was just 12 years old, right? Maybe it's just me living in the suburbs my whole life and them asking me, what are you doing around these parts every damn day when this is my block?
That's
So
your home.
when we talk about systemic, like it's not, it's to me, I don't look at it as it being sensational. I go, oh, wow, they actually got that one on tape. They didn't get my homies on tape. They didn't get my uncle murdered on tape, but they got that one on tape. I think it's a different reality when you actually live it every single day.
Yeah, I agree.
It's not, I don't see it as sensational. I think of it as empowerment, letting y'all know, letting people know this stuff happens. we're dying. Somebody like myself who can shake hands with the governor today and have all these people in my still have traumatic stress for just being a brown body next to white authority. So I think that there's just a lot of levels to it.
You know, and I've been talking a lot to people because I think being a white person, we take it for granted all the privileges that we have, that we don't have to think about those things.
Absolutely.
I'm not going to get shot jogging down the street. I'm not going to get pulled over just for walking along the side of the highway. I'm not, you know, I'm not going to be discriminated against in a store or a restaurant or anywhere because of my color. And I think that's shameless, but it's the truth. And it's something that people have to reflect on and say, don't take that for granted, because, you know, you have to, you know, you just have to accept that and then start thinking about your neighbors who don't have that privilege.
Yep.
And I think that to that point of privilege, I think as I tell people, and even in our Divided We Fall, we raised a really interesting point. We had an African American talk about his negative interaction with police, and then we had my other Black friend say, "Well, luckily I've been in this part of the community and I've never had a negative altercation with the police. Everything has been fine." And I think that there's nothing wrong with admitting that he was privileged to have to not have those experiences, right? I think that we often use privilege as such like such a defensive and attacking word. Like even me myself, I'm realizing as I'm navigating, like I am privileged to be a cis male. There is so many things that I don't ever have to worry about that my sisters have to worry about in the streets. Like I've never, you know, when I see group of guys like, and me like I'm fearless. There's certain triggers and traumas that I can't relate. I don't know, because I'm privileged. And to me, you know, it can be shameful when we look at it, but to me, I'm blessed. Like I'm blessed that I don't have to go through that. And furthermore, how can I do harm reduction now? Because like I said, my sisters don't have that experience. My Black trans friends do not have that same experience. So how can I be allies for them now? Like those are my priorities, because I have privilege. So how can I leverage my privilege that I have due to white supremacy, due to the structures of hierarchy and being a male and being a straight male? Like how can I use that to affect people that won't have the same experience navigating through life, being trans, being LGBTQ, being Black, being a woman, things like that.
Well, and that's it. You got to go down all the different little threads of discrimination. You know, I have a daughter, so I always worry about, is she going to have the same opportunities, the same privileges, the same chances that a man would have? Maybe, maybe not. I'm hoping she will. Being a person that's disabled, I'm constantly discriminated against. I mean, I've been thrown out of stores because they think I'm drunk, or I'm, you know, with Parkinson's, I'm shaking, I'm some kind of junkie or something, and I'm just trying to buy a green pepper. You know, you never know. I mean, it's something in human nature. We have this ability to discriminate against anybody who's different than us.
Right. And that's a whole other thing too. You know, if you're disabled, there's people who discriminate against disabled people as well. So, I mean,
oh God, I get yelled at all the time.
Yeah. I mean, it's sad. I mean, there's discrimination on so many different levels. It's not even funny.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, it's, you know, when it comes down to stereotypes too. I mean, I would imagine for you folks in the Indian community, there's probably a huge amount of stereotypes that you're like, no, I'm just a person, you know.
Right.
For sure.
I know a lot of my friends in the young people in the Asian community, they're like, no, I'm not good at math and I don't play the violin, and, you know, I'm just a person.
Yeah.
Judge.
Yeah, I was just average at math. I don't know about Kavito, but yeah.
I was in AP Calc, so yeah.
Okay, so
damn
you're over.
So.
I could never have done that.
Yeah. I was just in pre-calc. Yeah.
They do.
Don't you think that a lot of people make those judgments right off the bat? They look at you and they immediately form an opinion. And it's like,
Yeah. Well, what I noticed is, excuse me, at work, I notice people do make certain comments about, oh, it must be his culture, and that's why he talks that way. He talks very either low, or he talks very in a shy manner, or oh, he's not as aggressive in giving, commands, or delegating tasks or things like that. Oh, it must be it's his culture. And then I happen to be the person who they ask and say, oh, is it his culture? Is it? I'm like, it's everybody's personality is different.
well,
It
that's it.
doesn't mean that it's his culture. It doesn't
doesn't
mean
have
because
to do with the culture. It has
right,
to do with just their
right.
personality.
That
And
could
you
be
take
his
the time to
personality.
get to know that
Right.
person, listen to them, you realize it
Yeah.
has nothing to do with their culture.
Right.
Maybe the person's just shy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, those are the things that stay in people's minds, like in the back of their minds, like, oh, yeah, it's his culture, the Indian culture. Maybe it's this way or that way, and so that's why he's like that. But those little things stay in the back of people's minds, and they create all that implicit bias where now I'm going to treat you a certain way because I think you're this, right?
Yeah.
So that.
Well, and I hate it when people make comments like that. It's their culture. Or I really hate it because I have several friends that are gay. When they go, oh, well, he's gay, so that's why he's doing
That's
that.
why, right?
Yeah. And I'm like, no, that's not why he's doing that. It's
Right.
just who he is.
Right.
It has nothing to do with that. I also hate it when people judge women. They're like, oh, it must be her time of the month. That drives me
Right.
nuts.
That's
Right.
Straight out drives me nuts.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, this has been a fantastic conversation.
Yeah.
Getting back to the social media thing, I think you raised a really good point, Caesar, that I think too often people, because it's in a sense a one-way street when you're talking, you're not having a conversation until somebody responds. People do come in loaded guns. I've got my points, and they're not willing to listen to whoever is going to come back with it because they're already thinking ahead to their next step. What am I going to respond to? What am I going to do? So it becomes just a rant, not a conversation. Right. And I think there's no value in ranting. If you really want to go out and have a conversation with somebody, have a dialogue, ask questions, right, and then listen. And people just don't listen anymore. They're already thinking one step ahead to what they're going to say next. And it drives me nuts.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're just so often just prepared to be defensive and just to be ready.
Yeah.
When I look at the docuseries, I think like, how did we get to the point we got to, right? Like, how were we civil? How do we not just continue arguing? And it's interesting. I don't know the question. I think in person, I think was a big thing. I think us just looking at each other in the eye, looking at each other's face and just cracking or joking, like little things, right? Like cracking a joke about how the weather was getting in here and smiling and laughing. Prior to us, oh, you voted for this person, and there was still tension once that kind of reveal happened, but there was some type of civility that was already like as a foundation that was kind of built. And I think that, and I know when I think about, the weekend that I had with those people in the docuseries, we had breakfast and dinner together. So I know that I think little things like that, like having, if you're close to that person, right? Because I think a lot of times when I talk to my folks in the congregation, their anti-racism work is talking to their uncles, their aunts, their moms, their dads, you know what I mean? Like me being brown, it's different. I'm fighting structures. They start with the household and just having conversations, right, about intersectionality. And I think that, so they do it. So when I think about how they do it, right, how do you address somebody that you love? You're probably not going to start off with that paragraph of angry statistics and ready to hit that angry emoji on whatever they put, right? So it's like, I'm just thinking about this now. Like, if I could try to, when I do have those conversations, even with somebody that might be a little bit more leaning towards the right than myself, to be like, I'm going to have patience or try, like if they were a family member, like if it was an uncle, like if
Right.
it was an
That's
aunt,
wonderful.
because I think,
Yeah, that's
just
great.
as you mentioned, just the way the initial approach is, I think, is really defines the conclusion of the conversation a lot of times.
I think
Yeah.
one of the things that disappoints me about social media is it has eroded our capacity, and you used a good word, for civil discourse. It's no longer civil discourse. It's, I'm going to rant at you, you're going to rant back at me, and then
Right.
we're going to exchange just rants back and forth. And there's going to be
Yeah.
no resolution.
There's no actual conversation going on. Like,
Exactly.
Right. Right. Yeah.
no one's
I like to, yeah, Danny.
like no one's talking and no one's listening. It's just people yelling at each other.
Yeah,
You know.
exactly.
Yeah.
Nobody's listening.
I like to parallel that with like a concerned relative who has like maybe a mother, a father, or a child who has a disease, right? That child, or like, let's say, for example, if my father has diabetes, and I always see him going to the refrigerator for ice cream, and he always wants that ice cream. Well, I can't just start telling him immediately, what are you doing, Dad? You're not supposed to have that ice cream. It's bad for you. It's going to raise your blood sugar. It's going to da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. All that's going to happen is he's going to shut down. He's not going to listen. So I think that is kind of a parallel to what the work that we're talking about, right? The approach. Like, what is the approach?
I like
What
that
type
word
of,
approach. That's very good.
yeah,
That
the approach really matters. Like, and we have to just kind of take it very slow, because it can't happen overnight, but we have to take it very slow with those who we want to come around. Like, I want my dad to come around and,
Right.
not put all that sugar, not ingest
Right.
all that sugar, right?
Well,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Persuasive argument is a skill that not a lot of
Yes.
people possess.
Yeah.
Because there is
That's,
definitely a way you approach it. I love that word, approach. The way you approach it,
yeah.
and it's not yelling at people.
Right.
Yeah. And that I just, and that I want to go back to that question to Caesar about, do you find the approach in the older population to be more patient and more, I guess, sensitive, or more, more gentle than, more open than the youth, or is it the same, or is it different? Like,
The approach, it's interesting. I definitely, I can, as I'm thinking about the groups, I can definitely see some contrast. I think I know the intent is always the same, right? But I think
yeah,
the approach,
yeah.
when I think about like the front lines in Minneapolis now, Milwaukee, like all the people that I know in this community space, my age, doing things, versus the people that I know in the congregation that are older. And I think that I feel like the younger generation has a little bit more understanding of the systems, of how deep it is. And the only
Okay.
reason why I think that is because of
Mhm.
intersectionality. It's because we're learning about the struggle and then going back, right? Like a good example is, I wanted to go back to you, Thomas, talking about like ableism. I just learned about that this year, and ageism, right? And adultism, like all those
Right.
things. And like, especially like adultism, and hearing like, oh man, my parents have done that this whole time, and the intent was good, but it was extremely adultist, and like learning kind of all these things. And I think that like, and again, I think this goes back to goes back to the age of information. Like, I barely made out of high school. I did not go to high school. I barely made it to school, but I had so much education because of the things that I look up. I go to the library all the time and looking up independent research, and just the computer. I've looked up so much information to where I know about Black liberation projects all throughout the world, right? And colonialism and all these things. And there's a billion other versions of me. Like, that's the more than a million other Caesars that have that this. I was disillusioned in politics. You couldn't get me. I'm from the Black and brown community where we don't see a reason for that. Like, especially where I'm from, there's no reason for that. But now we become empowered because of being able to look up things by ourselves, joining collectives. And I think that, like, it's just more empowerment. And we have, come on now, 60 years, that's 60 more years of trauma. That's 60 more years of generational trauma and oppression and abuse that we've been in this country, that my grandparents and my fathers have been through. So I think, I don't want to say aggressive, but we do have a sense of urgency this time.
Urgency.
And I'm sure they had in the 60s, right? I wasn't there, but I can
that's
speak for
right.
my people and the urgency that we have. And they say, you know, we're not like our grandparents, but not necessarily that. We're just saying our ancestors have been brutalized enough. Like, we're not them. And I think that that's kind of like the key tone of what's going on right now with this revolution, is people just like extremely fed up. And in the 60s, it was more, I think, of like, let's come together, Black, white, like, and let's talk about the systems maybe later, that was important work, because we literally couldn't use the bathroom at the same ones as white people. So that was good work. Like, that needed to be done. Desegregation needed to be done, but we didn't necessarily talk about the systems, right? And even how those white allies that were next to us do benefit from white supremacy, white privilege, and now how we're using that to be leveraged to help our community. So I just think it's maybe a little bit more deeper understanding in the structures.
I do think young people have a stronger sense of the present, whereas many of us who are getting up, you know, I'm 57, I think a lot about historical aspects of it and go back through that. Like my kids, when they were studying history, they're like, so this whole civil rights thing that was going on, I'm like, in my lifetime. And they're like, oh, so it wasn't like 100 years ago. I'm like, no, it was like 40 years ago. But I think it's nice that young people now focus very heavily on the present. What do we need to do now? And that's important.
Yeah, I really think that this generation, and I'm from the 80s. I was born in the 70s, but you know, Benu, we grew up in the 80s here. And whenever we were, well, I can only speak for myself, but whenever I was bullied at school for being what I was, right, which people didn't understand at that time, my mom, I recall this very, very vividly, would say, you just ignore them and you focus on what you've got to focus on. You just ignore them. Whereas now I can tell you that I would not tell my kids to just ignore what is happening to them. I would really be very involved in getting to the root of, well, what's going on with this. You're being bullied, or you're being called names, these things are happening in school. I want to be right there, and we're going to be, we're going to get to the bottom of this, and somebody's going to be held accountable, and the parents are going to be there. They're going to be held accountable. Like, I think that exists now, where when I was growing up, it did not exist.
Well, no, no, not at all.
Somebody,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? If somebody came and, and this has happened to me. So, I mean, I know, when I was younger, that we will come, kick you, book you, you know what that is, right? Everyone knows.
Right.
So you just pick yourself up, you pick up your books, and you just look straight ahead, and you just go. You don't retaliate, right? But no more of that, right? I feel like
I think parents
kind of
I think parents hold people accountable a lot more than they did before. Whereas they used to do the stiff upper lip. Now it's like, if my kid, I'm going to figure out what's going on here. I'm going to help them, and we're going to get this stopped because it's not acceptable.
Right.
Right. Yeah,
And
I
my
think there is more of that. Mhm.
and then
Go
my
ahead,
parents
Ben.
were the same way. You know, they're like, you know, my dad would just be like, you know, ignore them. And same thing with my mom. They would both be like, ignore them, just go on with whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
And then at times my dad would just be like, you know what, just deal with it. You know,
Yeah,
and then
because
yeah,
yeah.
because especially in Schaumburg, you know,
Yes.
where we
Mhm.
grew up back in the 80s, there weren't many of us here. You
Right.
know,
Right.
so
Well, you know, I grew up, you know, in Hoffman State, Schaumburg too. That's
Mhm.
where I went to like
right,
junior high and high school, grade school a little bit.
yeah,
And
Mhm.
it was interesting because it was kind of a bullying culture. And
right,
Yeah.
if you were
The bullying
small
culture.
and you looked weak and vulnerable, you were a target.
That was it. That was it. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was going to say something. I think it's very interesting too because growing up in Hoffman Estates, there were 5 black people in my high school. That was
Mhm.
it, out of a class
Mhm.
of, you know, a full school of 2,000 people,
Oh
Yeah.
5
wow,
kids, and they were black. And basically their credo was when people say something to you, just ignore it. Just keep yourself safe. And I always thought that was really odd. But by the time we graduated in 1981, it had changed tremendously.
mm,
Mhm.
And so finally, you know, they were highly accepted into the class, but it took so long. But then, even when I talked to them, they were like, yeah, but I've got to go to the prom with Ronnie because she's the only other black girl that's my age, or I got to
Right.
do this because this is the only place I can do this. And I just thought that was awful.
right,
And I'm really happy that, like, when my kids were growing up, you know, my son would say, you know, I'm going to have, you know, smoking hot Courtney come over. And I want you guys to be nice and cool because we're going to just play board games and do things. And then smoking hot Courtney came in and she was black. And I'm like, awesome. He doesn't even think twice about this stuff. Not at
nice.
all. You know, he's just like, yeah, she's smoking hot. I'm bringing her home.
You know, what's
I
funny?
think
Yeah.
you can go, Ben.
Yeah. So no, Kavita and I, we went to Schaumburg High School, graduated in '94. The first 2 years, they
Another
were,
puppy.
yeah. You're the old goat in this kid. Um, no, like I remember
I
vividly, like
had I had age diversity to this show.
Yeah.
so. I remember like freshman, sophomore year, barely any Indian people, and then but then by
Yeah. Yeah.
towards like the end of junior year and all of senior year, there was
Explosion. Yeah.
such a big influx of Indian people, which I thought was great.
Mhm.
I wish that would have happened earlier, but you know,
Yes. Yeah. I know. Yeah, it was
Yeah,
a
and
strange time in the 80s. Yeah.
yeah,
you got to understand, I went to high school in the 70s, so I graduated in 1981.
mm,
I don't think there was a
Mhm.
single Indian person in my high school.
Right.
they were all in
Right.
Asians,
Chicago.
maybe a couple. It was
They were
lily
all in
white.
New Jersey.
Yeah,
We
they were
did
all.
have
Yeah.
one Puerto Rican guy. He was a really good soccer player.
Mhm.
So there you go, Caesar.
The one.
It was terrible. It was, you know, it was not diverse at all. And my kids' high school had pretty much evenly divided between Indian, Asian, black, and white. It was probably about a quarter, quarter, quarter. And I thought that was a
Nice.
great experience for them that they had so many friends that were
Yeah.
of different cultures, different races, different ethnicities. It was good because then
That's
they kind of
important.
grew up colorblind. They didn't
Yeah,
they didn't think about those things.
right.
Well, we're pushing an hour here, Ven. What are you thinking? Nobody's going to want to watch this for like 2 hours.
Right.
No, I did appreciate it. I'll just say that. I've been doing like panels the past few days, just different like online discussions and things like that. I did one, done a few, and like this was honestly probably the most refreshing that I've done in a while. Yeah, I'm very blunt, you know, and I really do mean that because just like the structure of it, it was like really open. There was just, it's nice to be able to talk about these spaces because I think a lot of times people just want to pat themselves on the back, and I'm in so many different spaces where we talk about community work, and I think these conversations are like the most important, where we just debrief and be like, oh, so that's how things were back in the day. Well, this is how things are now, right? Like I'm piecing things together as I'm hearing all these different stories of you all talking about, well, you know, I hear safety a lot. And when I think about my parents and why are my people activated now? Survivalism. My aunts, my uncles, as you were mentioning, Thomas, as you were mentioning, Kavita, and you, Vinny, like all three, like they didn't have the luxury that I have now, right? To where I have a big mouth and I can speak on injustices until they shut me up.
Yeah.
Back then, it was just my parents came from a different place. They sacrificed everything. Do what needs to be done to survive, which is go to school, go to work, and it's like and that's different now, right? Because that extra generation layer is where we feel not only like entitled, right? I'm born and raised in this country, like being a part of it, but just knowing that like my family had to be on their knees, so I'm gonna stand. Like my family had to, unfortunately, right, endure as I'm hearing like this servitude. My parents were born and raised from Puerto Rico. My dad to this day, thickest accents. It's so hard to speak. And I remember me being young and like being ashamed, to be honest, and being like, and that self-hatred was real. Like I used to hate when he would go order fast food and things like that, because like I'll just be embarrassed. People would say stuff, it would be hard to hear. And like now that I look at it, I'm like, I'm more empowered. And it's like I wish I had the pride in my people and being the person and the culture that we have now. And I think that that empowerment is maybe what we have now because we're privileged. Because like I said, I'm privileged now to have it, to where it's not just about survival, it's about maybe survival for the generations after me. And we're talking about surviving financially this time. We're talking about surviving with land. We're talking about surviving as an actual integral part of this country.
Right. It's now you're at the building stage, right? You're at the building stage. We were at the foundation stage, I guess.
Yeah, that's a nice way to put it, Kavita.
I don't know.
Oh, by the way, Kavita, how are your kids doing?
That's cool. Yeah. They're good. They're doing good. They're man, it's getting very tiring for them to be like indoors all the time. I mean, although now that with the weather being really nice, we go outside quite a bit, but I mean, they're, you know, they can't see their friends and stuff like that. So
I was going to ask you, how are things opening up in your parts of the world? Because here it started to open up a whole lot.
it is opening up. Although we're, you know, my family, we're being very cautious, so we're not.
Well, I'm personally being cautious, but man, they've opened up the bars, they've opened up the movie theaters, they've opened up the gyms, they've opened up everywhere.
Right.
You know, people are not wearing masks as much as they used to, and which really kind of frightens me because I'm very afraid of a second wave. But we never really had a very serious first wave either. I mean, compared to like Illinois and Chicago and New York, and California. I mean, it was never really. I mean, we never even had a requirement to wear masks. It was always just recommended.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and especially where I live, because I live in a relatively small town in Iowa, right outside of Cedar Rapids. We didn't have any outbreaks here at all. You know.
Yeah.
So we all felt like we were in this safety bubble, which is probably not a good thing because it makes people reckless. But you know.
Yeah. False sense of safety.
Yeah, false sense of comfort here. Yeah. We only had one outbreak in a long-term care facility, and that was it. But but we get our COVID-19 updates and when I look at our statistics compared to Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, Seattle, I'm like, we're not even a drop in the bucket compared to what's going on in the rest of the world.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, the place that really is a hot spot that scares the hell out of me is Las Vegas.
Yeah.
They are pushing like hell to open those casinos again, and
Let's go,
gamblers are not for being really responsible.
Let's go. Let's go to Vegas.
Very, yeah,
You're a big
a
spender,
risk,
man. Yeah.
that's a risk aggressive place, right? With risk aggressive
Yeah, that's a good way to put
population.
it. It's a
So
risk
that's
aggressive place.
Gamble with your life, you know.
yeah.
Yeah, there you go. That's what you're doing now.
Yeah.
Not just your money, it's your life.
Mm,
Talk about craps.
Okay, well,
yeah.
Ben, you want to close this down?
Sure.
Closing statement?
Any last
Well,
words, last thoughts?
Thank you all for joining and talking, especially to Cisa. Appreciate this. I'm gonna post this up soon, and I'll tag all of you. I had a great time. I learned a lot. I think it was a great discussion. You know.
Yeah, it was
It
excellent.
was a very good discussion.
Yeah.
I really
and-
appreciated it. Thank you all for just having this time for us to debrief and have this conversation. Like I said, been having a lot of discussions, like kind of charge and focus on social justice, but this was really refreshing for us to just kind of take a step back and just to really like reflect why, right? Like just have that why, I think, is a big question, because we act on emotions. We're emotional creatures, and I think that's just good to have this community building. So thank you, Vinny, for inviting me, and like I said, thank you all for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Thanks,
being
Ben.
on.
Guys, yeah.
All right. Thank
Always
you.
a pleasure to be a part of this.
All right. Thank you. Thank you
Yep.
all. Thank you, Caesar. Thank you for
Dear
being
friends.
Thanks, Tom.
Peace.
Peace. All right.
All
See you,
right.
Vinny.
All right. See ya.